The Hayes Ranch sat in a lonely pocket of Oregon foothills, a stretch of fenced earth baked by summers and soaked by endless spring rain. Buck Hayes had lived there all his life, 31 years shaped by barbed wire, dust, and the steady rhythm of hooves on dirt. His days rarely changed. The sun climbed over the pines, the cattle stirred, the horses snorted into the cold morning air, and Buck moved through it all with the kind of quiet endurance men learned when the world gave them more silence than company. Some called him dependable, others called him stubborn. Buck knew the truth was a little sadder. He was rooted, like an old stump that didn't know how to fall or how to walk away. The wind was his only neighbor most days, sharp and restless, whistling through the barn slats at night as if reminding him the world outside was still moving. And yet there he stayed, year after year, repeating the same trails across the same acres. His father had died on this land. His mother had been buried on the ridge overlooking the creek. Everywhere Buck turned, their shadows reached for him. Still, beneath all that loyalty, a restless ache gnawed at him. He wanted the road. He wanted the sky. He wanted to wake up somewhere that didn't smell like the same old hay and regret. But wanting was one thing. Walking away was another. Behind the barn sat Buck's secret, an old Ford pickup he'd been fixing piece by piece since his early 20s. The paint had faded to a sun-blistered blue, and the hood carried dents from a lifetime of storms and careless moments. But Buck had breathed new life into it the way some men rebuilt broken hearts. He had reinforced the suspension, replaced the cracked windows, and tuned the engine until it purred low and steady. In the back, he'd built a wooden camper by hand, pine planks sanded smooth, a narrow bunk, shelves for gear, a lantern hook, and a tiny desk where he imagined writing postcards from places he'd never been. Every nail, every hinge, every inch of that camper held a piece of the freedom he'd never dared to chase. It wasn't just a truck, it was a promise he kept postponing. Then came that fog-drenched morning when everything felt different. The valley lay silent under a pale gray sky, and even the cattle seemed to hold their breath. Buck stood on the porch with a mug of black coffee cooling in his hands. The mountains were ghosts, half hidden, and for a reason he couldn't explain, he felt the world leaning forward, nudging him. If not today, then when? The question settled heavy in his chest. He set the mug down, grabbed his old canvas bag, and began loading the truck. Bedroll, canteen, jerky, a few shirts, a map creased from years of daydreaming. When he slammed the tailgate shut, dust puffed into the morning air like the exhale of something long asleep. As Buck climbed into the driver's seat, a voice drifted from the fence line. "So you're really fixing to run from your own life?" He didn't need to turn to know who it was. Ayanna stood by the gate, one hand resting against a weathered post. The woman had arrived in town months earlier, settling in a small cabin near the creek. Folks said she was Apache, though Buck never needed the rumors. He'd heard her singing by the water at dusk enough times to know she carried entire worlds in her voice. She was the kind of quiet you listened to, not the kind you filled. Her dark braids hung over her shoulders, threaded with bits of turquoise and crow feathers. Morning light caught the copper in her skin, the fierce, wary spark in her eyes. Buck swallowed. "A man can leave his land without running from it." "You sure?" she asked softly, stepping closer. "Because you look like someone who's been standing still too long." He let out a rough laugh, the sound of a man caught red-handed by the truth. "Maybe, maybe not." Then, half joking, half hoping, he nodded toward the back of the truck. "Well, if you ever wanted to see the far horizon, there's room in the bed of that pickup." Ayanna studied him the way people study the sky before a storm. Slow, deliberate, searching for signs. For a long beat, she didn't speak. Then she nodded once, just enough to change both their lives. "Give me half an hour," she said. "I'll be ready." Buck felt something shift, like the first creak of a gate opening after years of rust. And just like that, the road called louder than the land had ever done. Ayanna was ready exactly when she said she would be. When Buck pulled the truck around to the dirt path leading toward her small cabin, she stepped out of the morning haze like she belonged to the land itself. She carried a worn buffalo hide satchel slung across her shoulder, a small bundle wrapped in deer hide, and a hand drum tucked under one arm. Turquoise bracelets clicked softly at her wrist, and the feathers braided into her hair trembled in the breeze. "Hope you don't mind light luggage," she said. Buck shook his head. "Truck seen heavier?" But he noticed her eyes more than anything, eyes shaped by storms and silence. The kind that had watched whole chapters fall apart and still managed to stay steady. They held a kind of quiet grief, but also something braver, the stubborn flicker of someone who refused to disappear. She climbed into the passenger seat without another word. Buck started the engine, and the old Ford rumbled to life like an aging stallion being asked to run again. They rolled down the gravel road, past her cabin, past the line of cottonwoods swaying beside the creek where she often sang. The tires crunched on the frost-bitten dirt, and the truck eased onto the county highway. Nothing but dust, pine trees, and the long, uncertain stretch ahead. The first miles passed in silence. Not an uncomfortable silence. Just two people who didn't yet know what shape their words should take. The morning sun filtered through tall Oregon pines, slicing the road into shifting strips of gold and shadow. Resin from the trunks filled the cab with that sharp pine scent Buck had known all his life. Dust rose behind them in soft brown clouds, curling off the back bumper and drifting into the endless trees. Ayanna watched the forest slip by as though studying the ridges, memorizing the pattern of light on each branch. Buck kept his hands tight on the wheel, telling himself it was because the old truck needed a firm grip. But truth was, he had never driven anywhere with a woman beside him. At least not one who seemed made of music and mystery, one who carried history in the way she breathed. He cleared his throat. "You travel much?" Ayanna smiled faintly. "Not the way you mean." Then she turned back to the window, letting the silence claim its place again. They were like two distant trails running side by side, not touching, not yet crossing, but slowly, steadily drifting closer. By late afternoon, the sky softened into a warm wash of amber. The road narrowed as they reached a stretch where the pines thickened and the maples grew wild and tangled. Buck pulled the truck into a clearing just off the highway, where an old fire ring suggested other wanderers had stopped before them. "This is as good a place as any," he said. Ayanna nodded. She stepped out, stretching her arms, letting the breeze carry through her braids. Buck unloaded a few blankets from the back, set a lantern on a stump, and checked the latches on the camper. It wasn't a spacious thing, just a bunk, a shelf, and enough headroom to sit upright, but it was shelter. When night settled across the clearing, it came fast and absolute. Crickets began their chorus, and somewhere in the trees came the low bark of a fox. Buck lit the lantern, its amber glow flickering inside the small camper like a heartbeat. "You take the bunk," he said. "I'll make do with the truck seat." Ayanna shook her head gently. "It's cold, we both fit. I don't bite." Buck hesitated, then surrendered to the truth of the chill. They settled into the narrow space, lying stiffly at first, each on their own side, blankets pulled tight. The camper smelled of cedar, wool, and dust warmed by lantern light. Outside, the wind brushed through the trees, soft, rhythmic, patient. Neither spoke. Neither moved more than necessary. And yet something subtle shifted in that silence, something Buck couldn't quite name. The tight-gated distance between them loosened, not by touch but by the simple act of sharing breath in a small space. Ayanna's voice came after a long while, quiet enough that Buck wondered if he dreamed it. "The first road is always the hardest," she whispered, eyes still closed. Buck turned his face toward the ceiling. "Yeah," he murmured, "but it's the one a man remembers the longest." The lantern dimmed. The wind hummed, and somewhere between the cedar walls and the cold night air, two lonely lives drifted, just a little, toward each other. Crater Lake rose out of the earth like a secret the mountains meant to keep. The water was so still it looked carved from blue glass. The rim of ancient cliffs reflected with such sharp clarity that Buck felt as if he were staring into two worlds at once. The one above him and the one deep below, older and quieter. He pulled the truck into a small clearing just before sunset. The air was crisp, tinged with pine and cold stone. Ayanna stepped out first, drawing in the mountain wind like someone greeting an old friend. Her braids lifted slightly, the feathers woven in them trembling with each breath of evening air. "This place," she murmured, "isn't just a lake. My people say mountains like these hold the oldest spirits, guardians who watch without speaking." Her voice was low, soft, yet anchored in something ancient. Buck had heard plenty of campfire tales in his life, but Ayanna's words didn't sound like stories. They sounded like memories. He set up a small fire ring near the water's edge, stacking pine branches until sparks snapped upward. Ayanna knelt nearby, her fingers tracing symbols in the dirt. Shapes he didn't know, patterns belonging to a life far from his. When the flames finally took hold, the lake reflected them in shimmering streaks of gold. Ayana sat across from him, legs folded, eyes gleaming in the firelight. "This is a sacred kind of quiet," she said. "You see how the water doesn't ripple unless it chooses to? That's how the old ones say a soul should be, still until stirred by purpose." Buck poked at the fire with a stick. "Never figured my soul was all that deep." Ayana studied him for a moment. "Everyone's soul is deep. Some just bury it under chores and fences." He felt the jab in her words but didn't know how to answer. The shadows stretched longer as twilight melted into night, and finally Buck spoke. Not because he wanted to, but because being here, under this enormous bowl of sky, made truth harder to hide. "You asked why I'm leaving," he said quietly. "Truth is, I'm scared. Scared that if I stay, I'll turn into nothing but the same miles of land I've been walking since I was a kid. But if I go," he swallowed, "feels like I'd be leaving my father's and mother's hands behind, like walking away from who they were." Ayana tilted her head, listening, not with pity, but with that calm, steady patience she carried like a second skin. "Land doesn't chain you," she said. "You do that to yourself." Buck stiffened. "Easy for you to say. You ran from your own people, didn't you?" The words came out sharper than he intended, but once they were in the air, he couldn't take them back. Ayana's eyes darkened. For a moment, the fire cracked loud enough to fill the silence between them. "I didn't run," she said, voice low. "I walked away from what was hurting me. There's a difference." "Well," Buck muttered, "sounds like running to me." "And you," she shot back, "sound like a man so scared of leaving home that he'd rather pick a fight with the wind." Buck's jaw tightened. "Least I'm not pretending the whole world is some story written in the stars. And least I'm not pretending I'm trapped by ghosts that aren't even holding me." The fire hissed as sap burst inside a log. For a few long seconds, neither spoke. The mountain cold settled around them, and Buck felt the weight of what he'd said, how quickly his own fear had turned into something that lashed out at the nearest person. Ayana looked away, drawing slow breaths as if steadying herself against old wounds. Then, without a word, she reached for her hand drum. The deer-hide skin glowed soft in the firelight. She rested her palm on it, and with her fingertips tapped out a slow, rhythmic pulse, steady as a heartbeat, deep as the echo of earth beneath the lake. The sound was warm and ancient, rising and falling like breath. Buck felt something loosen in him as he listened. The drumbeat wasn't loud. It wasn't meant to be. It was a bridge, simple, honest, built from sound instead of apology. And in its gentle cadence, Ayana offered peace. After a minute, Buck let out a long exhale. "I didn't mean to bite," he said quietly. "I know," she replied, still tapping. "Fear makes most men show their teeth." The music swirled around them, mixing with sparks from the fire, and the sharp edges of their argument softened. The night grew warmer, not in temperature, but in the space between them. Two strangers, both wounded in ways they hadn't yet named, sitting beside a lake that had seen more lives than either of them ever would. Buck leaned back on his hands, staring into the flames. "Your drum's something," he murmured. Ayana gave the faintest smile. "It's not the drum," she said. "It's the letting go." And under the watch of ancient mountains and guardian spirits, they did, each in their own quiet way. Northern California opened up before them like a page torn from a frontier tale, endless and wild in a way that made even Buck draw a long breath. The road wound through towering redwoods whose trunks glowed dark copper under the afternoon sun. Their branches arched overhead like cathedral ribs, turning the narrow highway into a quiet green tunnel. Every now and then, the forest broke open into sweeping fields of tall, sun-bleached grass. The wind combed through them, bending the blades into long golden waves. Buck drove with the window down, letting the air rush in, cool and fragrant with sap and earth. The old Ford rattled over the asphalt, but its engine kept a steady, low growl, like a loyal horse carrying them deeper into country neither had claimed yet. Ayana sat with her bare feet propped on the dash, her turquoise bracelets chiming every time the truck hit a bump. She watched the passing world with a gaze both wistful and wary, as if every mile reminded her of something she loved and something she'd lost. They had barely spoken since Crater Lake, not out of anger but out of the strange honesty that follows two people after a crack forms, when silence itself begins to teach them more than words can. It was Ayana who finally broke it. You ever loved someone who didn't know what love was? She asked softly, not looking at him. Buck glanced her way. I suppose that depends on what you call love. She let out a slow breath. To me, love is freedom with roots, a place where both souls can breathe. Her voice shifted, turning brittle around the edges. But I married a man who made breathing feel like a sin. Buck didn't rush her. He kept his hands on the wheel, letting the road and the rhythm of the engine carry her story out of her. Talon, she said at last. The name alone seemed to tighten the air. He was a warrior in our band, strong, respected. Everyone said he'd lead the people one day. Being chosen by someone like him, it felt like stepping into a story bigger than me. So what happened? Buck asked quietly. Ayana's gaze drifted toward the redwoods blurring past. He didn't love me, not really. He loved the idea of a wife, silent, obedient, shaping her life around his. He wanted a shadow, not a partner. Buck kept his jaw still. He'd known men like that, men whose pride outweighed their heart. She continued, voice lower now. He didn't want me playing music. Said it made me look too carefree. Said women with dreams made trouble. He didn't want me leaving the valley, not even to visit traders in the next settlement. Every instinct he had was about control, about keeping me inside the borders of his world. Buck felt something hot and fierce stir in him, but he didn't interrupt. This was her story to tell. He'd come home angry, she said. Sometimes at me, sometimes at everything else. But he used silence like a blade, cutting, cold. She touched the drum resting between her feet. He hated this most of all. Said a warrior's home didn't need songs, only discipline. A gust of wind swept through the open window, tossing a few strands of her dark hair across her face. She didn't brush them away. One night, she whispered, I played anyway. I just needed to hear something living, something that was mine. She swallowed. He grabbed the stringed lute my father gave me when I was a girl, snapped it in his hands, threw it in the fire pit, and when I reached for it, he didn't stop me. He just watched it burn. Buck's grip on the wheel tightened. Damn! It wasn't the instrument, Ayana continued. It was what it meant. She looked at him then, fully unflinchingly. He wanted to burn me into someone else. The truck hummed along the winding highway, its engine the only witness to her trembling breath. So I left, she said simply. Packed one bag, took my drum, what pieces were left of it after the fire, and walked out while the moon was still low. I didn't know where I was going. I just knew I had to go. Buck nodded slowly. Takes guts. Takes desperation, she corrected. They fell silent again. But it wasn't the strained silence of earlier. This one felt earned. Two stories laid open between them, both heavy, both honest. The road eventually dipped toward a wide valley where the late sun painted the grasslands in copper and rose. Ayana leaned her head back against the window, eyes half closed, letting the wind wash over her face. You know, she murmured, some people are born of earth, solid, steady, but some of us are born of wind. Buck smiled faintly. And which are you? She looked at him, a small, knowing spark in her gaze. The kind that can't be tied down. The truck rolled on, carrying a man afraid of leaving home, and a woman afraid of ever having one again. Both bound now by something as fragile and powerful as a change in the weather. Nevada didn't ease them into its heat. It threw them straight into the furnace. By midday, the desert had turned white under a blistering sun, the kind that made the horizon dance in wavering lines. The air shimmered above the sand, carrying a dry metallic tang that clung to the tongue. Buck rolled down the windows, but the breeze came in hot as a branding iron. Should have left at dawn, he muttered. Ayana shielded her eyes with her hand, her bracelets glowing under the sun. Deserts teach patience and respect. Pretty sure they teach dehydration, Buck grumbled. The two-lane highway stretched endlessly ahead. No shade, no water, nothing but flat desert and distant ridges half dissolved in heat. Even the old Ford seemed to pant under the weight of the temperature, engine humming reluctantly. Then came the sound. Pow-wow! A sharp blast followed by the violent wobbling of the truck. Buck cursed and steered them toward the shoulder, sand billowing around the tires. The front right wheel sagged like a tired mule. Well, hell, he said, stepping out. Perfect place for a blowout. Heat swallowed him whole the moment his boots hit the sand. Ayana joined him, her face calm despite the suffocating temperature. Buck dug out the spare tire and tools, sweat already rolling down his neck. The metal jack burned hot enough that he had to wrap it in a rag before grabbing it. Ayanna stood beside him, studying the land. "Wind's changing," she said, "coming from the east." "Doesn't change the tire, does it?" Buck snapped. She didn't flinch, just pointed. "If you angle the jack that way, the truck won't shift. The sand's softer here." Buck paused, jaw tight. He hated that she was right. Hated even more that the heat was cracking open his patience like sun-baked clay. "I've done this 100 times," he muttered. "And yet we're still standing here," she replied. That struck him wrong, sharper than he expected. He straightened, glaring at her. "You know, I'm not some fool who needs schooling on every little thing." Ayanna crossed her arms. "And I'm not some shadow walking behind you with my head down." "Never said you were." "You didn't have to." Your temper filled in the words. The argument rose fast, too fast. Heat does that to people, drags truth and anger right to the surface. Buck wiped his brow with a dusty sleeve. "I'm roasting out here, wrestling a damn tire, and you're lecturing me about wind like someone who knows the land better than you," she said simply. The bluntness struck like a spade hitting stone. For the first time, Buck's voice snapped loud enough to echo off the empty desert. "Can you just let me fix the damn tire?" The silence afterward felt louder than the shout. Ayanna's eyes narrowed, not angry but disappointed in a way that hit deeper than anger ever could. She stepped back, giving him space. Buck, breathing hard, bent down and forced the jack into position. His hands shook, not from effort, but from the sudden shame that burned hotter than the desert. He changed the tire in stubborn silence, each motion rigid and sharp. The sun hammered down, slicking his skin with sweat. Ayanna watched, expression unreadable. Finally, the new tire settled into place. Buck lowered the truck, chest rising and falling with ragged breaths. Then unexpectedly, Ayanna laughed. It wasn't mocking. It was warm, light, almost musical against the dead quiet of the desert. Buck stared. "What's funny?" "You," she said, acting like a thundercloud over a flat tire. He hesitated. Then a reluctant, tired smile tugged at his mouth. The heat had baked every irritation out of him, leaving only the absurdity of the moment. He let out a short laugh, then another. Soon, both of them were laughing hot, breathless desert laughter. The kind that comes not from humor, but from relief. And just like that, the tension crumbled between them. Ayanna stepped closer, her laughter fading into something softer. She reached up and wrapped her arms around him. Slow, deliberate, grounding. Her cheek brushed his dusty shirt. "Don't let the heat make you lose the good things," she whispered. "Not out here, not anywhere." Buck froze, breath caught halfway. Then he exhaled, shoulders sinking, letting himself lean, just a little, into her warmth. The desert roared around them, white and merciless. But for the first time that day, Buck didn't feel the heat. He just felt her. The California coast felt like another planet after the Nevada desert. Cooler, softer, washed in a pale blue haze that carried the scent of salt and drifting kelp. Waves thudded rhythmically against the cliffs, carving out a steady heartbeat beneath the sky. Buck parked the truck near a windswept overlook, where tall grasses bowed in long arcs toward the ocean. Ayanna stepped out before he even killed the engine. She walked straight to the edge of the cliff, boots sinking into the sand, her silhouette framed against a sky streaked with gulls. For a moment she just stood there, facing the endless stretch of water, her braids lifting in the sea wind. It was the first time Buck had ever seen her look unburdened, as if the water wasn't just a view, but a return to something forgotten. He leaned on the hood of the truck, arms crossed, watching her. Something was changing. He couldn't name it, but he felt it in the slow rhythm of her breathing, in the way her shoulders loosened, in the quiet strength radiating from her stance. Ayanna wasn't running from her past. She was finally remembering who she'd been before it. Buck opened his mouth to call out to her, something simple, something real, but before he could speak, the sound of hoofbeats shattered the peace. Steady, heavy, unmistakably intentional. Buck straightened, eyes narrowing as a lone rider emerged along the coastal trail. A tall figure on a dark bay horse, moving with the calm authority of someone accustomed to long distances and heavy news. The rider slowed to a stop near them, dust rising around the horse's legs. He was Apache. Buck knew it instantly. The braids, the beadwork, the leather riding gear, too traditional to be mistaken for anything else. His gaze settled on Ayanna. "I come on behalf of the council," he said, voice carrying the weight of mountains behind it. He reached into a saddle pouch and withdrew a rolled piece of deerskin tied with a strip of red-dyed sinew. For you. Ayana didn't move at first. Her breath hitched, barely audible beneath the ocean wind. Then she stepped forward and took the scroll with both hands. The rider nodded once, a brief gesture of duty completed, then tugged the reins and vanished back down the trail, horse hooves fading into the roar of the waves. Ayana stood frozen. Buck approached slowly, careful not to crowd her. What is it? He asked, though he already feared the answer. She untied the sinew with trembling fingers and unrolled the letter. Buck didn't read Apache, but he didn't need translation. He saw her face fall, the way a person collapses inward without sinking to their knees. Her lips moved, whispering the words as she read them. The council demands your return. The honor of the tribe cannot allow the wife of the deputy chief to wander foreign lands. You are ordered to come home before the next full moon. She lowered the letter, and her breath broke. Not loud, not dramatic. Just a small, sharp exhale, like something inside her had cracked open. Buck felt the urge to tear the damn letter from her hands, to tell her none of it mattered, that she didn't owe those mountains a damn piece of her life, but he forced himself to stay still. The ocean wind whipped past them, scattering grains of sand across their boots. It's not him I'm afraid of, she whispered, gripping the scroll. It's me. Buck frowned. What do you mean? She looked at the horizon as if it were slipping from her fingers. I've tasted freedom, Buck. Real freedom. What if going back means forgetting how it feels? What if I choose the wrong life again? What if I fold myself back into the shape he wanted? Her voice shook for the first time since he'd known her. Buck stepped closer, but didn't touch her. He needed the words to land clean, without confusion. You don't owe him your life, he said quietly, or your songs, or your silence. Ayana blinked hard, eyes shimmering. Buck continued, voice rough from holding back more than he said. You don't owe anyone the parts of you they tried to control. The wind roared up the cliff, lifting her braids, tugging the letter in her hands. For a moment, Buck thought she might release it, let the sea swallow the past entirely. But she held tight. I don't know what to do, she said. You don't have to decide today, Buck replied. Just know this. Your life isn't his to claim. Her breath steadied, bit by bit. She folded the letter and tucked it into her satchel with trembling care. The waves crashed. The sky dimmed, and between them something fragile yet fierce settled into place. A truth spoken without promises, without pressure. Ayana stood beside him, shoulders still shaking slightly, but her feet planted firm in the sand. Buck didn't pull her in. He didn't try to save her. He only said the one thing she needed most. You're free, Ayana. Whatever comes next, it's your road. Big Sur at night didn't feel like part of the world. It felt like the edge of it. Buck parked the truck near a cliff, where the land dropped sharply into black water. Below them, the Pacific crashed against jagged rock in slow, thunderous pulses. Above them, the sky melted from violet to plum, then into a deep wine-colored dusk that made the cliffs glow like old ember. Ayana gathered driftwood in silence while Buck built the fire. When the flames finally rose, they cast a golden circle around them, just enough warmth to soften the wind whipping up from the waves. The ocean roared beneath the cliff, steady as a heartbeat. The sky spread wide and ancient above them. Ayana sat close to the fire, knees pulled in, braids lifting gently in the wind. Buck watched her from across the flames, not staring, just noticing. The way her shoulders held strength, the way her face carried shadows of stories she hadn't told yet. After a long stretch of quiet, she spoke. I wasn't lying when I said I once loved him. Buck knew exactly who him meant. Her voice was soft but not fragile, steady like the rhythm of the tide below. Talon was fire, bright, fierce, a warrior with enough pride to fill a canyon. When he chose me, I thought the spirits had blessed me. I believed I had a future beside a man the whole tribe respected. She paused, staring into the fire, as if the flames replayed the memories for her. I didn't see what he really loved. Buck didn't push her. He let the wind speak through the grass for a while. Finally, she whispered, he only loved the shape of power, and he wanted me to fit into that shape. Quiet, controlled, obedient. A wife who existed in the shadows. Buck felt something twist in his chest. Not anger, not pity, recognition. You didn't fit, he said gently. Ayana shook her head. I wasn't meant to be owned. I wasn't born for silence. For a moment, The only sound was the surf hammering the rocks below. Then she reached into her satchel and pulled out her hand drum. She brushed a thumb along the rim, slow, reverent, as if greeting an old friend. Buck watched her, his heart thudding with something he didn't want to name. Ayanna began tapping the drumhead with her fingertips, soft, steady, like a pulse traveling through the earth. The sound mingled with the wind and the waves, creating a rhythm older than language. The firelight danced along her cheekbones. Her eyes shimmered, not with tears, but with the weight of truth finally spoken. Buck shifted closer, not quite touching her. He didn't plan anything. His hands simply moved, almost without thought, reaching gently toward hers. He stopped just shy of contact. Ayanna looked at him then. Really looked, her gaze deep and unguarded. Then without hesitation, she turned her palm upward and let his fingers touch hers. She did not pull away. Something warm and seismic passed between them, like fault lines shifting under the surface. Buck's thumb brushed the back of her hand. Her breath hitched, not in fear, but in surrender. The drumbeat slowed, softened, then faded completely as her free hand lowered it to the ground. The wind hushed, the world stilled. When Buck leaned in, it wasn't with urgency. It was slow, deliberate, asking instead of taking. Ayanna met him halfway. The kiss was unhurried, deep, carrying the loneliness they'd both carried for too many years, blending it into something tender and fierce. The cliff, the ocean, the fire, all of it fell away as their bodies leaned into one another, drawn by a gravity neither had fought off in a long time. When their lips parted, neither moved far. Their foreheads rested together, breath mingling in the cool night air. Ayanna whispered, "I haven't felt safe with someone in a long time." "You are now," Buck murmured. The drum lay forgotten at their feet as Buck helped her stand. They walked back toward the camper, fingers still intertwined, the fire crackling behind them like a loyal witness. Inside the small wooden shelter, they didn't rush. No frantic hands, no careless urgency. Just warmth, just closeness. Just two long-wandering souls finding shelter in the same place for the first time. The lantern's soft glow traced their silhouettes as they lay together, slowly, gently, learning each other's rhythms. Ayanna's breath against Buck's neck, Buck's hands steady on her back, a quiet, shared truth settling in the air around them. Outside, the ocean roared. Inside, they found a kind of peace neither had known in years. And by the time sleep finally claimed them, the road ahead no longer felt like something they were running from, but something they might face together. Morning in Big Sur didn't rise gently. It spilled across the cliffs in a flood of pale gold, turning the ocean into a sheet of hammered silver. The wind carried the smell of salt and wet earth, and the world felt new in a way Buck hadn't felt in years, like something had been scrubbed clean overnight. Inside the camper, the lantern had burned out hours earlier. Dawn crept through the small window, brushing warm light across the narrow bunk where Ayanna lay, curled beneath a wool blanket. Buck stirred first. His shoulder ached from the cramped sleeping space, but when he rolled slightly, the ache vanished the moment he saw her. Ayanna was wearing his shirt, his old, soft, sun-faded flannel, hanging loosely over her frame, sleeves rolled to her elbows. Her hair, dark and heavy, spilled over the blanket. For once, her face wasn't guarded. Not fierce, not bracing for the world. Just soft, open, free. When she blinked awake, the morning light caught her eyes and turned them warm amber. Buck swallowed. "Morning." A faint smile lifted her lips. Small but real. "Morning." For a long moment, they simply breathed in the quiet. No rush, no awkwardness, no second guessing. Just two souls who had survived too much, finally waking in a place where the world felt wide enough to start over. Ayanna sat up, hugging the blanket around her knees. Her gaze drifted toward the ocean shimmering beyond the cliff edge. Something settled in her expression, a clarity Buck hadn't seen before. "I can't go back," she said softly. Buck didn't interrupt. "I can't return to a place that tried to silence me, a place where every breath had to be measured, every dream questioned." Her voice trembled, then steadied. "If I go back, I won't be myself anymore. I'll shrink, I'll bend, I'll disappear." Buck nodded, slow and sure. "Then you don't go back." She turned to him, searching his face. Not for permission, just for truth. "I'm choosing my life," she said. "Not the one Talon expected, not the one the council demanded. Mine. Buck felt something swell in his chest. Not triumph, not possession, just respect. Deep and grounded, like the roots of an old pine. "What do you need to do?" he asked. Ayana inhaled the sea-salted air. "I need to answer him. The right way." She reached for her satchel and took out the deerskin scroll Talon had sent. Then she pulled a scrap of soft tanned hide from her bag. Smaller, paler, blank. She set it on Buck's little wooden desk at the back of the camper. From another pouch, she retrieved a small turquoise inlaid feather, a blue heron feather, rare and sacred in her people's tradition. Buck watched in quiet reverence. "This," she said gently, holding the feather between her fingers, "is how Apache women end a bond that was built without true harmony. We don't shout. We don't break things. We give the other person a sign that the spirit path between us is closed." She dipped the tip of the feather in ochre-colored pigment and pressed it onto the hide, leaving a soft, delicate imprint. Then she wrote a single line beneath it in her native tongue. The motion was slow, steady, final. Buck didn't understand the words, but he understood the meaning. She folded the hide, tied it with a strip of rawhide, and looked at him. "Will you take me into town later? I need to send this by rider." "Course," so he said. "Whatever you need." Ayana let out a long breath, as if releasing years she'd carried alone. Their journey didn't turn north. It didn't turn back. They drove southeast toward wide country, past rolling California hills, across dusty mesas, into the edge of New Mexico. The land grew redder, older, lined with stone formations shaped by time itself. By the time they reached the outskirts of Santa Fe, the world had become a blend of desert and art, adobe houses glowing warm under the afternoon sun. They stocked up on water, jerky, bread, and blankets. Then they rode out into the open, toward a valley where tall grasses swayed beneath a watercolor sky. Buck pitched a canvas tent near a stream. Ayana gathered river stones and built a small fire ring. That night, under a dome of stars so bright they looked close enough to touch, Ayana played her drum again. Slow, rhythmic, tender. Buck sat beside her, boots in the grass, shoulder brushing hers. They didn't define what they were. They didn't need to. Love didn't rush toward them. It grew, quietly, steadily, rooting itself deep in the soil of everything they'd already survived. In the firelight, Buck took her hand. Ayana didn't pull away. And somewhere between the mountains and the river and the soft thrum of her drum, they began, truly, to rewrite their lives. The road home felt different than the one they'd taken south. Not because the land had changed, but because they had. Oregon rose slowly on the horizon, first as distant hills, then as the familiar dark stretch of pine that marked the edge of Buck's world. The sky was overcast, the kind of soft gray that made the air smell like rain and moss. The old Ford creaked as it rolled back onto the winding roads near their town, dust washed clean by the coastal winds they'd left behind. Ayana leaned her forehead against the cool glass of the window, watching the fir trees blur past. Her drum rested on her lap, still wrapped in deer hide from their nights in the valley near Santa Fe. She hadn't spoken much that morning, not out of heaviness, but out of quiet reflection. Buck knew the difference. He drove with one hand on the wheel, the other resting loosely over the worn gear shift. The closer they got, the slower he seemed to breathe. He wasn't nervous. He was carefully aware, the way a man gets when he's bringing someone into the place that shaped him. Finally, the truck turned onto the dirt road leading toward the outskirts of town, the place Ayana had once lived. Her cabin appeared on the right, tucked between two cottonwoods. But it wasn't the cabin she remembered. It felt smaller now, dustier, too still. Ayana stepped out of the truck slowly, boots sinking into the damp earth. She approached the porch as though touching the ghost of a life she'd outgrown. The wind pushed strands of hair across her face as she stood in front of the door she used to open every night with a sigh of exhaustion. Now she felt nothing but distance. "It doesn't look like home anymore," she whispered. Buck stood beside her, hands in his pockets. "Maybe it ain't." She turned to him, eyes glistening in the soft morning light. All the doubts, all the fears that had followed her since receiving Talon's letter, they flickered in her gaze. Not fear of him, fear of slipping back into the life she'd fought so hard to escape. Buck could see it. He'd felt it building in her since Santa Fe. So he said the things she couldn't say out loud. Not to him, not to herself. "Here or anywhere else," he murmured, voice steady. "We go where you choose." Not where the past drags you, not where fear pushes you, and not where some man thinks he has claim over your life. She blinked, breath trembling. We don't have to stay here, Buck continued. We don't have to leave either. What matters is this. He reached out, brushing one knuckle tenderly under her chin. Wherever we go next, we go together. The word hung in the air like a promise caught on the wind. Ayana's throat tightened. Not out of sorrow, but out of the kind of relief that breaks a person open gently. For the first time in her life, she wasn't choosing out of fear. She wasn't choosing for anyone else. She was choosing herself, and the man who had given her room to breathe, not rules to follow. A tear slipped down her cheek. Buck lifted his hand, wiping it away with the back of his finger. Then she whispered, voice shaking, "Take me home, Buck." And he knew exactly what she meant. They drove back to the Hayes Ranch, a place Ayana had only seen in passing, once just a speck of land belonging to a quiet man she barely knew. But when the truck rolled into the wide pasture, something inside her settled. Not because the place was grand, it wasn't. It was worn, weathered, honest. A white farmhouse leaning slightly to one side, a barn held together by stubborn nails, and a corral where horses grazed beneath a sky always bigger than itself. Ayana walked toward the front porch, inhaling the smell of cedar, old wood, and Buck. "This feels more like home," she said softly. Buck's voice warmed. "Then let's make it yours." And she did. Over the next few days, she transformed the small spare room into a sanctuary. Apache colors, Apache spirit. She hung a dream catcher she wove herself over the window. She burned sage and sweetgrass, letting the smoke drift through the house in soft ribbons. Her drum and her father's broken string lute sat together on a low table, symbols of what she'd lived through and what she refused to lose again. Buck watched every change with a quiet smile. He didn't try to shape the space. He just gave her room. By the time the first evening settled over the ranch, warm and alive with the smell of stew simmering on the stove and sage drifting in the air, Buck realized something simple and true. This wasn't his house anymore, not just his, it was theirs. And for the first time in her life, Ayana belonged somewhere she chose with her whole heart. Morning on the Hayes Ranch had a rhythm of its own, steady, familiar, the kind that settled into a man's bones. The sun rose slow and honey-colored over the rolling pasture, stretching long beams of light across the field still damp with dawn dew. Buck saddled his horse every sunrise, the leather creaking softly as he swung into the saddle. He always glanced back at the house before riding out. There, through the open window, he'd see Ayana braiding her hair in the golden light, sometimes humming under her breath, sometimes standing still, as if listening to the land itself. By mid-morning, Buck was halfway across the ranch, riding fences or moving cattle, while Ayana walked the dusty road into town with her hand drum tucked beneath her arm. A small group of kids waited for her behind the weathered church, a handful of ranch children, a few from the Umatilla reservation nearby, and one shy boy who never spoke, but always tapped his feet to rhythms only he could hear. Ayana knelt among them, tapping the drum in steady, earthy patterns. "Feel the beat," she'd say. "The land has its own heartbeat. Listen." The children followed, tapping small makeshift drums and tin cans. Their laughter carried across the quiet street, drifting through cottonwood leaves like confetti of sound. People in town had grown used to her presence, this Apache woman with calm eyes and a brave, unbroken spirit. She walked with a quiet confidence, neither seeking attention nor avoiding it. She simply existed as if every step was a deliberate act of choosing life. In the evenings, when Buck rode home with dust in his beard and a tired horse beneath him, Ayana already had supper going. The house smelled like warm cornbread, sage smoke drifting from the small clay bowl she kept near the stove, and the rich aroma of cowboy coffee simmering in an old tin pot. Two worlds blending, two spirits weaving around each other in a pattern older than either of them could fully grasp. The nights always settled softly over the ranch. Sometimes Buck would split wood while Ayana sat on the porch, weaving dream catchers from willow hoops and sinew, turquoise beads threaded through like tiny scraps of sky. Other times, she'd play her drum while he leaned against the doorframe, boots crossed, arms folded, letting the music soak into him. The sound of her drum mixed with the distant thunder of hoofbeats became their new soundtrack, Apache rhythms braided with ranch life, a harmony neither of them knew they were missing until now. One late afternoon, as the sun dipped low and painted the sky in molten gold, a rider appeared on the distant ridge. Buck stiffened at first, but Ayanna touched his arm softly. "It's all right," she murmured. The rider approached slowly, bearing no sign of threat. His horse stepped calm and sure, stopping a respectful distance from the fence. He nodded once at Ayanna, then retrieved a small folded hide tied with a strip of red cloth. "From the council," he said simply. Ayanna accepted it, her face unreadable. The rider turned and left without another word. Standing in the quiet yard, Ayanna untied the cloth. Inside was a single line, written in the flowing hand of her people. "Live the path your heart chooses. No demands, no threats. No claim over who she had been or who she must become. Just release." Her shoulders eased, breath leaving her in a long, trembling exhale. Buck watched the letter flutter in her hands, catching the last orange glint of sunlight. She folded it carefully, almost reverently, and tucked it against her chest. "It's over," she whispered. "Truly over." Buck reached for her hand. She wove her fingers into his without hesitation. That evening, as the sun bled into the horizon, they sat together on the old wooden fence overlooking the vast grassland. Wind combed through the tall grass, bending it into slow, rolling waves. The sky burned with shades of rose and amber, swallowing the land in a warm, timeless embrace. Ayanna leaned her head against Buck's shoulder. He rested his cheek on her hair. Neither spoke. There was no need. The life behind them had been full of fights, storms, and broken places. The life ahead of them stretched out quietly, wide as the prairie, steady as a heartbeat. Buck squeezed her hand gently. "You know," he said, voice low and rough, "I never figured a half-joke would lead me to all this." Ayanna smiled, eyes half closed. "Sometimes the wind carries us exactly where we belong." They watched the sun disappear, letting the darkness settle softly over the ranch. Two wandering souls who had finally stopped wandering, because somewhere along a dusty road, sparked by a half-serious invitation and held together by courage neither expected to find, they had built something stronger than a home. A place chosen, a life reclaimed, a love that belonged to no past but their own. And on that wooden fence, beneath a sky swallowing the last of the day, Buck and Ayanna found the truth they'd been chasing all along. Home isn't a place, it's a person, and the road you choose beside them.